So, of course, this presentation is going to be on Amanita and Christmas. As I mentioned before, we're just trying to find out the core of it. Like is Amanita really the core of Christmas? Is it even intertwined at all with it? Um, and is the red and white symbology with Christmas have anything to do with Amanita, or is it really just a kind of false hearing that seems like a good story, but isn't really? So that's what we're going to first talk about. But first, I'm going to go through a little bit of a map of what's going to go on in this little talk today. We're going to go over the story that we keep hearing online. I'm sure you guys have heard about it. And then we're going to talk about a couple of like kind of important terms so that we understand how we can even use symbols to determine what the core of any Christmas or tradition is. We're going to talk about the different layers on top of the shamanic origins, some of the main symbols, and then we're going to talk about this main story, which I'm super excited to share with you guys today. And then I'm going to end it all with just a little bit about how to use Amanita during Christmas, just for your own enjoyment, as well as using it for midwinter festivities, which is on the 21st. Okay, so the first thing we're talking about is just the story that I keep hearing repeated, the same one over and over and over again, right? And I'm sure you've heard about it. It's about these Siberian shamans, where the origin of Santa Claus itself and of Amanita. The story goes that they would go up to the North Pole, collect these Amanita mushrooms, and fly on reindeer because reindeer are associated with Amanita because they also enjoy eating Amanita. They would collect these mushrooms and then they would go through the smoke hole of the yurts. And the reason why they would go through the smoke hole is because there was a bunch of snow built up around the outside of the yurt because this is northern. The origins of Christmas come from northern Europe, Siberia, that are northern area, cold areas. And then they would place them in people's stockings above their fireplace to dry. And then the association with the tree was because Amanita looks like gifts underneath the tree. And same with the thing with the tree itself. The decorations are supposed to be like trees, like you're adding the Amanitas to the tree to dry. And Jonathan Ott was the first one to really put the story together in 1976. And it's pretty much just been repeated the same thing over and over again. You can even see how popular it was. It went into the New York Times. There's a couple problems with this theory, and this is where I first started having issues with it, was that the fact that one is that yurts don't have smoke holes that can fit humans. So if it's a real story, these shamans should be able to fit through. But in a yurt, they actually just have a tube that goes from what their cooking surface is up. It's cold. They wouldn't want to have a giant hole in the top of their yurt anyways. They also didn't have fireplaces to dry these amanita above. They more likely had like a fire in the middle rather than something where they can hang. And Amanita is more of a medicinal and visionary tool. Anybody who's used it for a long while understands this. And it's not really recreational. So the idea of them going through and just handing them out like candy or just like a gift, and it's just everyone was using it, doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't have the same intentionality that I imagine that somebody who was a shaman would have. And so we have this issue. So now we want to dig into it. This is what inspired me to look into it. And now let's just talk about a little bit about how the basis of it comes from the midwinter solstice celebrations. People around back then were more in line with the solar light cycles. You can see here that winter solstice is when we have the lowest amount of light, the shortest day. It's also the birth of a new sun. A lot of people believe this. This is the when the sun seems to stand still in the sky. It's also the thinnest veil. A lot of shamans and these Native American tribes around the world believed that the winter solstice was when you were more able to connect with your spirit guides, connect with ancestors, gain wisdom for the next year. And all the celebrations really revolved around light, joy, bringing protection to the household because you could also have not only could you have positive spirits, you could also have some negative spirits. So you do want to protect the household as well. So how do we get from a midwinter festival all the way over to a Christian festivity? Really, it has to do with the fact that Christianity spreads through absorption. So instead of using force or conquest like a lot of Catholicism does, Christianity likes to just cover up symbols from other traditions and put their religion on top of it. And so the term is used that I found online is called conquest conversion. And it's pretty much that process. It just replaces these symbols, knowing that these symbols are important to the people. And I have an example here of the top of a Catholic missionary in San Antonio, Texas, where they took a sun, which is what the Native Americans believed in as being something that was really important to them, and then they drew Jesus's face on top of the sun, just to kind of push that idea that, oh, you thought you were worshiping the sun, but actually what you meant is the Son of God, which is Jesus. And so you can see how they're kind of covering up the sun with a face. Not that it's wrong or anything, it's just that's how they like to spread their religion. Sacred dates like solstice and Odin becoming Santa are a couple examples. Okay, and last, like big terminology we'll get out of college classwork after this one is about the collective unconscious. And so, why do we even have to cover up all of these other things? Why couldn't you just put your new religion in front of them and say, hey, convert over to my religion, it's better? And it's because of these shared symbols that we all have as humans. It's really something that's interesting that Carl Jung has really described in detail that these symbols kind of rise up from the past and almost like, when people are doing artwork, they just can't help themselves but draw a specific type of mushroom, or they can't help themselves but draw a specific, imagery that it's almost like it's in our DNA that we've all inherited these certain patterns from the past. And so they have to actually instead kind of distort these symbols to fit what they need. So some examples would be like Santa or a shaman from winter solstice, they would have to distort it to say, oh, no, you guys meant it was the Christian saint, Saint Nicholas. And so knowing this, that you're going to have to constantly put these layers, you can actually say that we can find the source of Christmas, really. There's the symbols are still there. The symbols that we have today are going to be the same symbols as back then. We just need to find out what the core of that symbol is. And so that's the whole premise of this talk today. And so, like I said, just got to get to the core of it. You got to strip back layers, just like we strip back layers of our ego identity, especially when we're going through an awakening process. All of the things that we thought were us, that were actually just projections, are really just there to protect us. And at the core of it is our true self. And so we're just trying to find the true self of Christmas. And so these are the layers we're going through. We're starting at the top. This is our Americanized Christmas. This is like the raspberries on top, all the colors, all the fun things we can do for Christmas, all the gifts and everything. And then you go down lower, and then there's Christian tradition. We say the origin of the modern is the birth of Jesus. And then we have a bit of influence from Roman traditions like Sol Invictus and Saturnalia. And then a lower layer beyond the Christian Christmas is the Norse Yule. Lots of people like to go back to celebrating Yule if they don't feel like Christmas resonates with them. And then the lowest layer, the deepest layer that we can find with the story is the shamanic traditions with Christmas, which is the world tree story. And I'm going to be talking about that at the end. So that's the layers we're working with. And then we're gonna go through all the symbols, and this is just gonna be mostly pictures and kind of a little summary of each of these layers. So the date that we know is the 25th. We're told that it's Jesus's birthday. We all know this. We have Christmas gifts underneath the tree. I took a photo here of Fred Meyer just the other day just to show you how we really have this like red and white coloration and how much stuff there is to buy. I mean, it really is Christmas. It's just overwhelmingly in your face in our modern world. Stockings, we sometimes put them over the fireplace, and we get coal if we're bad. We get little trinkets if we're good. And elves are supposedly these Christmas helpers of the North Pole. One of my favorite movies is Elf. That really depicts it well. They're just part of the capitalism structure. They just make the toys, and then they're presumably working the whole year making toys for us. It's a really interesting idea to have elves doing that, like almost like child labor. And holiday drinks, you guys all know. And there's also kind of a new holiday drink, which is like coffees and things. Like Starbucks has really brought in coffee as being kind of a Christmas thing that wasn't a thing in the past. You got to be awake when it's dark outside instead of slowing down. You need to keep going. And then this is the second page, so I'll have 2 pages for each of the layers. Like I said, red and white, green, these are all very common colors for us. Santa Claus has that Coca-Cola imagery. He's kind of big and jolly, and reindeer come from the north. We all know this story. And then the star at the top of the tree. And everyone knows we have to have a Christmas tree inside. Why do we have to have a Christmas tree? We're going to find out. And then the next layer down is the Christian layer. This is what we say is the base of Christmas, or at least what we're first learned. I went to the only church ceremony that I ever went to was the Christmas Eve, to talk about how Jesus was born and the story that we all know. And so the date is chosen as December 25th for Jesus's birthday. However, there's a couple inconsistencies. The date was chosen 300 years after his death. So he actually didn't say that they knew when he was born until 300 years later. And he was most likely born in the spring due to the fact that there was lambs in the manger where he was born. And so that would make sense that it would be springtime. And Santa Claus is supposed to be Saint Nicholas of Myra. You can see him here, holding a book and having his red and white garb on. And he was supposed to be from Turkey, so that doesn't really align with our kind of Northern European traditions. He also judges people as being good or bad, but he also does have a bit of a secret gift giving, ideology, which makes sense why he would be put in the place of Santa Claus. And reindeer aren't really particularly associated with St. Nicholas. This is because he was from Turkey, and he wasn't until a poem in 1821 did he even get associated with it. The Christmas tree is described as the tree of paradise. This is that big tree that was in the Garden of Eden. This is the apple that, Eve eats and, causes the chaos of the world and whatnot. I don't know all the details of that story. And then the evergreens are meant to represent the eternal life through Christ. That was their, symbology of it. And the star is the Star of Bethlehem. You can see that in that photo there. That's the guiding light to get to Jesus. Stockings are a main part of Saint Nick's story. The story goes that Saint Nick left gold coins in the shoe of a man who couldn't wed his three daughters because you have to have a dowry, some money to be able to marry off your daughters. He felt bad about it, so he left some coins in some shoes or socks sitting by the fireplace. The problem with this story is that in Turkey they didn't have fireplaces, and historians do presume that it was actually more like shoes that were by the front door and he tossed it through the window. And then there's, of course, the other gift idea is the three wise men gifts, which are gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Two of those gifts were actually from trees. Myrrh and frankincense are kind of the lifeblood of the tree. And the gift giving idea was borrowed from Saturnalia, which we'll talk about in a second. And the elves, the same kind of thing. They didn't really have elves in Turkey, and so they were made into these demonic ideologies. This is the whole idea with the coal in your stocking if you ever do anything bad as a child. And you can see an image there. It doesn't look so good. It's kind of like the good and the bad cop almost. Holiday drinks were some apple cider based on this, this tree from Adam and Eve, eggnog, and the colors, of course, were based on Christ's blood and purity. Okay, now we're getting into just the Roman layer just briefly because it has to do with the date. Why do we have the 25th is because of Sol Invictus. This is the birthday of the unconquered sun. You can see on the bottom right. That's why it's so important is because this was like the day that they realized that the sun was actually getting bigger each day. It was like 3 or 4 days after the solstice. They were like, okay, it's actually getting bigger. Let's celebrate the birth of this sun. Saturnalia has a lot to do with the celebration of Christmas, where they honored the god of agriculture. So they were very big into gift exchanges. They small gifts, candles, even a little house mice was gifted as a food offering. Lots of feasting, lots of drinking, and so that brought in a lot of that gifting ritual to Christmas. Okay, now we're getting to some of my favorite layers. This is the Norse layer. This is when we have the winter solstice and a lot more tied to the seasons and the land. Santa Claus, before St. Nicholas, was actually Odin, and Odin was an important figure in their cosmology. He had a white beard, and he even had an eight-legged flying horse, and he flew around on Yule and gave gifts to people. And people would leave out hay or carrots for their horse as kind of an offering for his horse. And before Odin, there was actually Freyja, which was a goddess of fertility, luck, and magic, and she rode a chariot with two cats. So before reindeers, there was even a cat ideology. And this kind of brings this idea of the magic to Christmas. The Christmas tree was actually have more to do with the sacred grove, so people believed in having groves instead of churches. And so they would leave offerings on the trees to thank them for all of the gifts that they had given them throughout the year, even in terms of wisdom. And the star on top of the tree was the North Star to symbolize the guidance and light amid the darkness, because, of course, the North Star never moves in the sky. And then gifts were often homemade. So things like you'd make a candle for somebody, you would make some homemade food, or you would offer things to the spirits. And what's really interesting in this part, I love this one, is where the elves start out, is these house spirits. They called them Tomte or Nis, and they believed that these little house spirits lived around their houses and in their communities, because this was village life in Norse mythology. And they had little red hats, which kind of looks like Amanita, And the only way that they could get into the house was through the chimney. And so these little house spirits, like many elves, they're kind of mischievous. They're very friendly to people who treat them well, and they're not very friendly, or they steal things to people who don't treat them well. And so they would leave offerings by the fireplace in their socks to keep them happy and to make sure that they don't treat them badly when they come through the chimney. And so I really do see that this chimney travel comes from this elf culture in the Norse layer. And holiday drinks, ale and mead, I mean, that's not too surprising. They would use kind of fruits and honey to make drinks. Colors, red, are mostly for the berries that they had because holly, mistletoe, and rowan, they were all plants that stayed red and fruited even in the wintertime. And this is also where the wreath comes from. They used it as a way to protect their house. They really believed that winter solstice was a time that spirits, both good and bad, could come in. And so they believed the evergreen and holly were used to protect their house. And so you see that's why it's on the front door, because that's where the entrance of somebody would be. Okay, now we're into my favorite layer. This is the deepest layer. This is the shamanic layer. The date is still the same. It's December 21st. And Santa Claus at this point in time is actually more of shamans, almost always women if you go far enough back, because they were really the stewards of liminal spaces and magic. And they traveled between the spirit and in the real realm on solstice due to the fact that it was such a thin veil. And some even wore the colors of Amanita to honor it. Actually, when I was looking into this and I was thinking about the fact that if somebody was using Amanita a lot, would they actually wear the red and white? And I looked down and I realized that I've been wearing this sweater with Amanita on it, red and white sweater for the last like several weeks. So maybe there is something to that. And their animals, us reindeer, are super sacred to them. In the wintertime, reindeer were some of the only animals that were around that didn't leave the Arctic zone. They were used for clothing, travel, drums, and they believed them to be important spirit guides for shamans. And so they had them as spirit guides to travel with them in their spirit bodies. I'll get more into that story too. And the Christmas tree is this cosmic world tree. So it was a connection between the earth and the heavens, and it had deep, deep, deep roots all the way into the center of the earth, and the top of the tree reached the top of the sky. And at the top of the tree was the North Star, which brings the whole Christmas story back into the North Pole, that this tree was at the North Pole and the star was the guiding light to find the North and to find the Christmas tree. And that's why we have the star on the top of the Christmas tree, is because that's where it was located. It was located right at the top. And so these shamans, what they would do is they would take Amanita on, I'll go to the next page. They would take Amanita on the solstice and they would travel via their astral bodies up to this world tree and climb it and pass these like different levels of riddles almost. Like there was the almost 7 or 9 levels, just like that Yggdrasil, I don't know how to say it. The world tree cosmology in Norse mythology probably was adopted from this, that you would have to go through all these different levels to gain wisdom or knowledge that you could bring back to your village. And so I couldn't find any information about stalking specifically, but I did find some maybe notice some information that maybe they use their astral travels and they traveled through the smoke hole. Though anybody that knows much about astral traveling knows that you don't need to go through, you can travel through walls, no problem. So that doesn't quite make any sense. And the only people that really did the Amanita tea, from what I can understand, is shamans who actually understood how to use and treat this mushroom respectfully, how to use it as a trance medicine. And there might have been some small tribes where they would pass it around to the community on like certain special days as a respect for everybody. Or it was more of or like you would be invited to the house or the yurt to have a celebration with them, but not used as just a recreational drug. Doesn't ever feel like that's what happened here. And then the colors, yes, Amanita can be used, I mean, can be seen as a symbol, but they weren't fruiting in the winter time. If they were dried by the time they hit winter, if they picked them in October or September, which is what would happen up there, they would be red then. And by the time it's December, these mushrooms would have been dried and they're now brown or orange. So really the colors I see have more to do with the red as a symbol of life and vitality and the blood of reindeer, which they often would kill one on winter solstice to have for the whole village, and white for the spiritual realm and that connection to spirit. And so you can see here some symbols. I'll dive into that story a little bit more, but I do want to show you guys how you can see how things have changed over time. These different symbol layers, we have Santa Claus here, and so when we go back, you see shamans and how it's changed over time. Though you can still see some similarities. It's still red and white. There's still somebody that's an important member of Christmas and who travels to the spirit realm. Okay, I think I didn't miss one. And then the tree, this is the different layers of the tree. You can see this is the great mother tree. And then we get to the world tree from Yggdrasil. And it's really interesting here. This is the one photo that I could find that showed this overlap of the Christmas tree and the world tree. Because that, to me, in this Norse Yggdrasil tree, that looks like a Christmas tree to me. I mean, it even has ornaments on it. It doesn't have the star on the top, which is interesting, but it definitely does look like Christmas tree. And then we get to this kind of cover up by the Christian missionaries to make that world tree into an apple tree, which is probably where a lot of our ornaments come from, red baubles, little red balls all over the tree. And then now we've kind of adopted into our modern age. We don't really use apples anymore, but we do decorate the tree and we put Christmas gifts underneath it. And maybe the Christmas gifts have something to do with, our symbol, our unconscious symbolism of Amanita growing under the tree, which would be really kind of cool. Okay, so I did miss the my favorite one, which is the house spirits. So you can see kind of nature guardians. So when the shamans would go up to the North Pole, they would interact with what they saw as nature guardians, these spirits that were protecting the tree itself and were maybe asking them riddles to make sure that they could access this knowledge. And then it moved to the house spirits when the people started moving into villages, and then the Christian layer, which is the kind of demonic. They didn't know what to do with it, so they kind of tried to demonize elves into Krampus and Father Whipper to the point where it's pretty scary. Like this drawing shows that Krampus was shown as stealing these children, where they would put them in a basket and take them off if they were badly behaved. And you could see the girl there with her apples that she was good that year, so she got a gift instead. And then you can see in the modern layer, we didn't like that story. It's like a little too demonic and evil for Christmas, and so we've kind of gone back to just the original house spirit idea, these Christmas elves that live in the North Pole. So sometimes the symbols that we use to cover up don't really work out that well. Okay. And so at the base of this story is this is the information that I really resonated with, and what really came to me with Amanita was this story of this world tree at the top of the North Pole, of a great grandmother tree sits at the North Pole, directly beneath the North Pole star. And it connects all the different dimensions of the earth, and is the only way that you can access all these different dimensions of the world. And it was also the birthplace of life on Earth itself, that this is where anything that was started would spread out, a lot like the Garden of Eden. I mean, the similarities are uncanny. And this tree was visited spiritually by shamans with the help of the Amanita tea, which helped, quiet their ego mind so that they could separate their bodies and travel there, and a thin winter solstice veil to bring wisdom and advice back to their village. And it was such an important story that they would celebrate every single year. So it wasn't just, oh, we're celebrating trees and we're celebrating Amanita, but it was actually their world, their cosmology, which does explain a lot about the fact that why would Christian missionaries, why would they want to cover up this story in Christmas so much? Well, it's because it was direct access to the divine. You could use your drums and you could use Amanita as a spiritual gateway to accessing your own wisdom and your own information. And the Christian church would rather you go to their church, and they would rather you go and talk to a priest to access information. Um, and then let's move on to this one. So the core symbols, as I see them, are these three symbols of the star, the North Star atop the tree, and the Amanita mushrooms beneath them. That those are the symbols that when you look through all the symbols that I looked at with you, that one stayed the same. It was like the colors of Amanita and the usage of it, the star at the top of the tree. I mean, we don't have a Christmas tree without a star at the top of it. And the fact that trees are always brought inside, even though from a young age, even I was questioning the fact that we were bringing a whole tree inside. We would pay $100 for a tree from a tree farm, bring it inside just so it could die slowly, and then you put gifts under it and decorate it. I thought it was so strange. But now when you think about it, you're like, well, it resonates with all of us at a deep level. That's why we're still doing it. That's why we're still putting the star on the top of the tree. And so what I'm saying here is that Ott may have been partially right. I mean, he was really onto something. He was one of the first people who was starting to say, let me question this Christmas story. Something doesn't feel right. Maybe this mushroom has a lot more to do with it. And he was obviously using the mushroom at the time and he saw the value and the spiritual benefits of it. And so he said, maybe Christmas is all about this mushroom. But one of the biggest issues that we have with Amanita, and I see it still to this day, is that oftentimes you'll see the value of this mushroom and then all the focus goes on the mushroom. The mushroom is the one giving me all the information. The mushroom is so amazing. Like, we need to give everyone this mushroom. And really, the lesson that I always get from Amita is like, don't put the focus on the mushroom, put the focus back on you. This is a tool to help access certain realms, to help access your own inner self, to take off some layers, but it is not the answer. And it can be explained by, giving Amanita to anybody just willy-nilly. You start to realize that not anybody can take Amanita and all of a sudden have a transcendental experience. They often have a bad experience or they don't see any benefits to it. And it's not only until they're ready to work with it can you actually see the benefits of it, or they're actually ready to face themselves or let go of fear. And so, as I say here, we need to remember two things about Amanita. One, it's a mycorrhizal mushroom, so we cannot forget about the tree from which they partner with. And I always think that Amanita is really a co-creation from Mother Earth and from the trees. You can't grow Amanita by itself, and that's the reason for it. It's because it's a gift from both. It's a mushroom, but it's also from the tree. It's really the fruit of the tree. And that Amanita is a connector spirit. She loves connecting with others. She loves connecting humans with nature, to teach us that we can't just grow things outside of nature, that we need to work with nature, to connect us with our inner self, taking away all of these layers, these personality traits that aren't really ours, so that we can access who we are authentically and what we're supposed to be in this lifetime. And then to access our true north, the star, our true north, our guiding light, our dharma in life, to help us access that. And that's where I think that these symbols are so important that we don't forget about that. And then I want to dig into these three symbols just a little bit more because there's just also interesting. Like I said, Amanita was usually used in like low to medium doses, not in high doses, more just to access the state of mind to be able to astral travel. I mean, the number of stories that I found about Sami people and Northern Siberian people, bringing this up to some select scientists was actually amazing. I had no idea that they were using it for astral traveling and that they shared this medicine with select people and communities. And it's just like any other major entheogen around the world, iboga or ayahuasca or peyote, they weren't just handing these things out to everybody. It wasn't hey, this is a good medicine. We're all just going to give it away to people as gifts. It was more of like when somebody's ready, maybe they can come into this, a yurt or whatnot to have an experience or to connect more deeply with something. It wasn't just something they passed around willy-nilly, which makes a lot of sense for, what a shaman is used for. And then, okay, let's go back. And so this shamanic journeying is actually a really important part of it, this drumming that they would use to access it and the mushroom itself. And so when Christianity spread, there was actually kind of a push to remove all drums. Actually, they went and they took people's drums, they burned them, and this happened around the world, of course, but it was particularly a big deal in that area because they knew that these drums and these medicines, and of course they demonized Amanita as well, making it seem like it was a toxic mushroom. You don't even want to touch this mushroom. It's evil. It's going to make you sick. And it wasn't that it was completely false. I mean, if you just ate a raw mushroom, it was not good, but there was definitely some distortion to this story that was suppressed. And it grows at the base of the world tree. What's really interesting is that, from what I understood, was that all trees, pine trees specifically, and Amanita are kind of children of this tree long, long, long ago. This is way back, millions of years. And it's interesting because when you look at the scientific data, the oldest Amanita DNA is actually from this northern Siberian Beringian area, right between the North American Alaska and Russia. That area seems to be the oldest specimens of Amanita DNA. And so if that was the case, you would say that's pretty close to the North Pole. That's probably some of the closest land that we still have to where, the North Pole might have been when maybe we had Pangea back, connecting everything together. Okay, so I really want to go into this world tree symbology. It's super interesting to me because once I said, okay, if the Christmas tree is actually a world tree, ideology? Is there more evidence of this world tree? I mean, if it's real, there would be evidence of it in other societies. And what I found was that was absolutely the case. I mean, I think I found pretty much every continent, every age, almost every country of people had some type of belief of a world tree. I mean, Mayan and Aztecs all believed in the Ceiba tree or Yakshe tree, which is here on the bottom left of a giant world tree with different dimensions that shamans would access with entheogens. The Norse mythology obviously was adopted from this, Yggdrasil. Most people understand that one. That one's this top left one here with the different dimensions connecting, and they talked about the different layers of heaven. And then we have the Hindu Ashvatha tree. Here's the middle left one is actually a fig tree, they believed. And you can see it really showing the chakras of the tree, almost mirroring a human body, these chakras. And maybe this is why they would use the trees for, enlightenment or whatnot, is because it was almost mirroring themselves so they could learn from the tree. In Mongolia, they had a Modin tree. Tanzania, that's where it is. Tanzania. I've even been there and I can't say it. Tanzania, Iroquois, the tree of peace is on the right. This is a white pine tree. This is the North American version of the world tree. Chinese Taoism, in the Jianmu, which is the top right here. Beautiful, beautiful tree. Korea, sacred tree of Gongsan Mountain. They believe this tree was on a mountain. You can kind of see this in the Norse one, actually. And in the Sumerian, the oldest layer is the Sumerian story. It's the first civilization was the Hulupu tree, which was coming from that Gilgamesh tale that you guys have probably heard about it. So is it possible this tree is actually just this symbol in our collective subconscious because it was actually a real tree in the past that existed? And this brought me to another question that, you know, if it was a world tree, and this is, a little bit far-fetched here, but I kind of wanted to keep going with this because it's really interesting. What what evidence do we have that this world tree ever existed? Obviously it doesn't exist anymore. I don't see it anywhere. So I looked into this, and some stories, like the Norse myth, said that it was destroyed during Ragnarok. Maybe this happened during the fall of humans, like the story in Eat and Adam and Eve, and that they also believe that it would be reborn one day. Sumerian tale said that Gilgamesh cut it down, or in another story that it got flooded and it got taken away. And so there are some stories about it being destroyed in the past. And then consider this, when I was looking into this information, I came across a video about this Rupus nigra, or Black Rock is also the name of it, the center of the North Pole. And it was described in this 14th century book called Fortunate Discovery by an Italian friar. It was all written in Latin. This book has disappeared, though people have talked about it and referenced it in other books. And he pretty much described going on this expedition up to the North Pole and seeing this giant black rock that was about 30 miles wide at its base. And it was surrounded by some land masses with four different rivers flowing towards it or away from it. And then it went on, and then people later on had actually drawn it into a map to kind of make it into a visual. And this is part of the map that I show here on the right. And so is it possible that this is actually the base of it? It's really a petrified wood kind of situation. I mean, you can see here what is this? This is in Jackson, not, is Wyoming. This is the Devil's Tower is what they call it now. Looks very much like the stump of a tree. Is it possible this is like a petrified wood tree? We know of lots of stories of the fact that in the past we had trees much bigger than we have now. There was a higher level of oxygen. So it's possible. Who knows? And consider this, the highest grossing film ever is Avatar. And that literally is a movie about their world tree, or their big tree that was connecting them to the spirit realm. I think they called it the tree of spirits, or the tree of souls. And then, of course, the main story is it got cut down and them trying to kind of rebuild after that. So I don't know. It does seem like there's a lot going on with this world tree. And, the fact that we're bringing in a Christmas tree into our house every single year and we think it's normal and putting a star on top of it, it does seem very interesting. And so I wanted to kind of go over just like some of these photos because when I was looking at photos of all these different things, all the different symbols, more than any other Christmas symbol, Christmas tree was so many, there were so many more pieces of art of Christmas trees on the internet because it's just people were so inspired. You could just see all the different designs of them. This one on the top right really looks like a giant world tree to me. Like you can even see the space up in the top. And then also consider the fact that you put Christmas in your phone to like type out a little emoji and the Christmas tree is the first thing that comes up. So I think that's really cool. And then the last symbol is Polaris. That's the North Star. You know, this is supposed to be the one that tops this tree. What's really interesting about Polaris is it's motionless. It's the only star in the sky that's motionless, that no matter where you are on the Earth, it'll always stay the same. And that if you stood there and you took like a long exposure photo, just like this bottom left one, you can see that all the other stars revolve around it, and it's the only one in the middle that doesn't move. So it's super beautiful and interesting. It obviously has a big symbological importance to people. And so what it symbolizes is guidance and direction, like I said, and higher purpose, you know, finding your true North Star, constancy, and just being steady with what you're doing, and then trust in dark times that, you know, it was most visible, most likely, during winter solstice when it was the darkest. Oh, I didn't even mention this, but it's interesting if you ever like want to look for the North Star, how to find it. You find the Big Dipper, which most people can find pretty easily, and it's these last two parts of the Big Dipper, like the side of the farthest wall of the pot, and then you shoot it straight out, and the first bright star is going to be Polaris there. It's always a good trick to show people because not everyone knows how to find the North Star because it isn't the brightest star, and that's why. All right. And so why is this important? Why am I even sharing about this? You know, why was I even inspired? Why not just like write out something? It really reminds us that we have a responsibility to respect the natural world, that we used to be so much more connected to the natural world. I mean, we would celebrate winter solstice every winter. We would celebrate summer solstice, all the equinoxes. We were so much more connected to the stars and the North Star. And, you know, we might have this collective pain or trauma of having a large tree cut down, that we do understand how important trees are and the natural world is to us, so that we shouldn't be, you know, taking from it as much as we do, and maybe we should have a bit more of a balance. Also, it reminds us that trees and Amanita are really sacred partners in our collective awakening, that we're not meant to do this alone, that there may be ways to, you know, gain wisdom by using tools like Amanita, psilocybin, ayahuasca, any other plant medicine. You know, Amanita was obviously the sacred medicine of the northern people, but that doesn't mean that it's everybody's. It is mine, and anybody that's probably on this call. And that trees, you know, like Buddha was said to become enlightened sitting beneath the tree, and many other stories talk about trees being so important to, you know, finding out the truth and finding out more about ourselves. And maybe it has a lot to do with the fact that trees mirror us, and they're very much similar to us, that the deeper our roots go into the ground, that's how we know, you know, how much further we go into the deep roots and into our subconscious and all of our trauma and all of our issues, and bring that to the light. That determines how much further up and how much more joy and how much more enjoyment we can have with life. You know, we can't just grow as a tree or as a human and elevate our consciousness without going through all that. You know, it's kind of mucky, but sometimes we got to do it so that we can have the good part. And then it also is important because it might be a story that really connects us all. I mean, maybe this is why Christmas, even though people don't celebrate Christianity, still celebrate Christmas. Maybe they see something really valuable in this, that, you know, we're bringing this entity into our house, this beautiful tree spirit into our space, and we're celebrating darkness, you know, the light within all of us, and we're coming together as a people, and that there might be the origin story, a story of a giant tree, a great tree that connected us all. And I think that's really beautiful. You know, something that connects all of humanity is always going to be something that I'm, you know, very pro. And then also, the winter solstice is just a time for connecting more deeply with ourselves, our community, and our life path. Like I said before, that, you know, as everything else around us is darker and looks more miserable, and we don't have as much time outside, it's a great time to go inside, have fires, be with people, you know, bring brightness and light, otherwise. Okay. And so I want to finish it off just with some tips and some things that could help you guys use it for midwinter Christmas. I mean, it does obviously seem like Amanita was the medicinal plant or fungi of winter solstice. And so a couple of ways that we can use it in our modern age is one, just to help us socialize, taking it from like zero point 0.5 to 2 grams as a microdose can really take away any like doubts or worries, like social anxieties that might prevent you from talking to somebody or talking about what you're going through. And like maybe, before, if you were just drinking alcohol, you might just not really show your true self. But if you use Amanita, you might be like, you know what, I'm going to talk about, that trip that I just went on. I just had some mushrooms and I want to tell my family about it. Or maybe I want to talk about the fact that I'm using Amanita and I want to explain to them where I'm going through. Or maybe you talk about something that you're going through that's a little deeper and then have more authentic, genuine conversations with people. I mean, that's honestly what I would hope more people can go towards, less towards the alcohol and more towards these kind of more intentional medicines. And another way to use it is just to lift your spirits. I really believe that they were using Amanita as a way just to kind of brighten their day during the darker months. There's definitely a reason why it fruits right before winter time, and then, let them dry out for 3 months as they decarb, and then they can now use them during winter solstice for just cheerfulness, getting rid of all the worries. I mean, really, the one of the downsides with the dark time and when things aren't happening outside of us is that we go inwards, and if we don't like what we see on the inside, negative thoughts, worries, and just like self-deprecation, it can be really a rough time, and which is why people are often kind of miserable in the wintertime. And so Amnita can really quiet that negative thought. It can help detach us from our struggles so that we can have a higher perspective of what we're going through and see that it's more of a gift than just struggles. Something bad that happens to you may not be is always a gift. I mean, I really believe that the universe is always trying to help us in our awakening process or in our growth or in just trying to get us into a place that feels more in alignment and more fulfilling. And sometimes things feel like they're traumatic to us, but we just don't have the right perspective. We lose a job and we feel terrible about it, but that job was actually draining us and whatnot. And so it really helps us be a little bit more positive and present with ourselves and not so in our head and thinking negatively. At least that was really one of the big things for me. And then astral travel, this was definitely a new one I had to add here that it might be easier to access spiritual realms using Amanita. However, of course, this comes with the caveat that you need to protect yourself and you need to learn all of the different ways that makes it a safe experience because when you leave your body and your soul is leaving your body, which is another risk of using Amanita in a high dose, both ways, when your soul leaves your body is exposed, and so you always want to have some protection around that. And this is why people have had some really negative experience with Amanita, and personally, people that I know have had that only at high doses and only when you leave your body. So not, it's all good at microdose levels. And then lastly, it just helps you connect spiritually. If you're less in your head and less in your ego, you can connect more easily with yourself. You can connect more easily with your guides. Really helps with meditation. And I really kind of offer this to you to all to, don't just take everything that I've said as truth, dig into it and see if this resonates with you. Try meditating, meditate and see if you can connect with the spirit that can still exist, maybe that, time doesn't really exist. And so this tree does dimensionally exist in this time, even if it's, if it did exist, it would still have a spirit here. And so see if you can connect in with it. See if this does exist for you and if this is real and if any of this makes sense for you. Because ultimately, I don't believe anything anyone says should be taken as 100% truth until we say, does this make sense for me? Does this help me out? And then move on from there. But it also just helps with meditation. Like I said, like I use it before I go to bed. So I'll use it right before I go to bed and I'll sit there and meditate for 10 to 20 minutes just to kind of clear out all of any thoughts in my head, maybe ask for some guidance. And then that really helps calm me down so that I can go to sleep a little easier. And also it's a sleep medicine. So if you use it in higher amounts, like 1 gram or a little bit more, it really, really does help with sleep. And this is the time for sleep. This is the time for rest and relaxation and recouping so that when the new year comes, we have more energy. Okay, and then this is my last slide. This is my like questions slide, but I wanted to tell you what this photo was. And this is what AI, ChatGPT, made when I said to create an image of the world tree if it existed based on all of the stories of every culture that has some idea of the world tree. And I just think it's so beautiful. Like, wow, wow, just so beautiful, with this like line of light through the center of it and all the pools of water and everybody sitting there meditating next to it. It's just beautiful. And so I open the floor up to any questions if anybody has any, for me. Oh, go forward. And if not, that's okay too. You might have to digest it a little bit too.
Yeah, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that all of these different cultures have a different tree meant
Yeah.
to represent the world tree. Do you have any idea why that might be? It's not a unified species, if you will.
Yeah, I actually had that question too when I looked into it. Like the shamans of Siberia believed it to be a pine tree. Sometimes they believed it to be a birch tree. North America was a white pine tree, and then this was a fig tree in India. And maybe that shows that it's not really one tree at all. I mean, there's a couple of ways you can see it. One is that it's not really one tree, that it has maybe the genetics of all the trees, like kind of like I said before, that they believed that it was the origin of all the trees. So it's possible that it has kind of parts of all of it. Maybe it had apples and it also had figs and it also had all of these things. I mean, I don't even know. I've never met this tree. And, it's 30 miles wide at the base. I'm trying to imagine what that would even look like. And it's also possible maybe it was kind of like splicings of different trees together. I've seen trees grow together, three together, and it looks like, one tree when they're growing right next to each other. The other one is just that over time, since, maybe this tree got cut down, if it was long ago, that stories have shifted over time and somebody who's living in India can't relate to a pine tree up the north, so then they call it the fig tree so that people can relate to it better. And maybe as it went further and further away from the north, the stories kind of got a little bit distorted to match what the native or the local people would have around them. Like it was a baobab tree in Africa. There's definitely no baobab trees up in northern, Siberia, and so they wouldn't believe it's a baobab there. So there's definitely some questions there. I agree, and that's a good one. Well, I'll leave it to you guys. I mean, I hope you guys have a really nice winter solstice, Christmas, whatever you guys are celebrating. I hope you guys learned something. I mean, I feel like I learned so much from this, and every time I dig into more of it, I end up learning more and more about this. And just like I said, I found out about this story just based on the fact that it didn't resonate with me. And I kind of got a ping from Amanita that I should look into it more. And then the information just kind of opened up to me. So, I leave it up to you guys. Look into things more, explore things that feel like they're right, discard things that don't seem like they resonate. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good one. And if you guys liked it, let me know, and I might do more presentations in the future.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you. Bye,
Happy solstice,
guys.
everyone.
Happy solstice.